Shalom, greetings VFI news supporters and anyone else watching this video. It's been an emotional roller coaster in Israel this week, but even as our VFI news team was putting together this report, the word came down that for better or for worse, a ceasefire deal has been reached. But that doesn't mean this war is over, as the Houthis in Yemen continued firing missiles at Israel this week. Syria and Lebanon remain highly unstable, and there was more bad news on the economy. All that and much more is just ahead on VFI News from Israel. But first of all, I do want to read this scripture as a reminder to all of you who have been praying for the hostages, to proclaim liberty to the captives and the opening of the prison to those who are bound, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn, to grant to those who mourn in Zion. And so, people, we are praying for the complete release of all the hostages, as you can see on the shirt I'm wearing here, because they are part of our family here in Israel. So let's keep praying and stay tuned for the news. Friends, as I'm sitting here recording this video, all indications are that a deal has been reached, which we will see a long-term ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, accompanied by a release of many of the remaining hostages who were kidnapped into Gaza on October 7, 2023. Now, there are many details of this deal that are just now coming to light, and some that might still change, because you can't trust anything that Hamas says. Believe you me, they have lied every bit of the way. And some that are also disputed by different parties. So I'm not going to give you an exhaustive rundown of all these details, but just the broad outlines as well as some of my own thoughts about it. I think most Israelis would agree with me that the big positive point is that at least 33 hostages are set to be released in the initial phase of this deal. We don't know at this point how many of them are still alive, but many of them probably are, and maybe all of them are, I hope. In exchange for this initial release, there will be a 42-day ceasefire during which the IDF is expected to redeploy away from the Philadelphia corridor, very important for security. This runs along the border with Egypt as well as the Netzarim corridor, which bisects the Gaza Strip about 2/3 of the way north of that border. Now, that IDF redeployment looks an awful lot like a retreat that will allow Hamas to threaten Israel in the future. This is bad. Hamas is still in control of some parts of the Strip, and believe it or not, they're also still recruiting new members and finding weapons to attack IDF troops with. Although they've been severely degraded in terms of military power, they're not admitting that they've been defeated. There is no doubt that they will declare themselves the winner of this war just for having survived it. Many throughout the Arab and Muslim world will echo this ludicrously absurd claim of victory, and it will become a rallying cry for future battles. Sadly, we've seen this movie before here in Israel. Just look at the children and the adults rejoicing in the Gaza Strip on the news. They're already rejoicing as if they've overcome and they're the victors. But that's not the part of this agreement that many Israelis are most upset about. The worst part is that in exchange for Israeli hostages, Hamas has demanded that Israel allow hundreds of Hamas security prisoners to go free. These terrorists include quite a large number who are in prison after having been convicted of murdering Israelis. No one in Israel can forget that Yahya Sinwar, who planned and organized the October 7th massacre and was the chief of Hamas in the Gaza Strip for most of this war, was among those prisoners released in exchange for Gilad Shalit in 2011. The great fear that many of us have is that among these prisoners being released as part of this deal might be the future mastermind of yet another attack, and it's motivating many to protest against this agreement in the streets and also inside the Knesset. National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, that gift who just keeps on giving, posted a video this week in which he brazenly admitted to having blocked several deals to release hostages in exchange for ending the war over the past several months. He said he did it because continuing the war until Hamas is defeated is what was and is needed. And he might even have a point. But I'd be surprised if that helps him in the next election, when this video is sure to be used against him by his political opponents. Be that as it may, his attempts to get his main political ally, Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, to join him in bolting the governing coalition in order to scuffle this agreement appears to have failed, as the leadership of the main opposition parties publicly committed to supporting the deal. We might be headed to new elections soon in any case, and candidly, I don't even think that's a bad idea anymore. The kindest thing you can say about Ben-Gvir is that he's not a team player, and in the last 2 years that he's been part of the governing coalition in the Knesset, he's managed to alienate almost everyone, including other MKs in his own party. It's a waste of time to speculate about how many people who voted for him in the last election will still vote for him again in the next one. But no matter how many mandates his party gets in the next election, I doubt anyone will want him in their coalition. As for Smotrich, the polls have been showing for months that in the next election, his faction won't even cross the electoral threshold. Now, some might say it's in bad taste to talk about politics during war amidst a hostage release deal, but I'm afraid there's no avoiding it. It is very unlikely that we'll get through the new year of 2025 without going to elections here in Israel, and once again, I'm afraid I've come to the conclusion that this is necessary, even if it was very frustrating and will be even more frustrating. Now, I could say a lot more about that, but there's a lot more news and, more importantly, to cover. Let's start with events to Israel's north, where the initial 60-day period of the ceasefire with Hezbollah is coming near to its end. Hezbollah has not held up its part of the agreement by deploying all its forces north of the Litani River. By the way, there's new information and historical reference that Jews actually had settlements just below the Litani River in between the present northern border of Israel. That's another story in itself. Now, the IDF has also carried out airstrikes this week on Hezbollah positions all over Lebanon, including border crossings between Lebanon and Syria that Hezbollah was attempting to use to smuggle in weapons and ammunition, which they appear to have plans to use in another round of fighting with the IDF. It is truly remarkable to me that these guys still don't think they've lost. They're not even ready to take a break to regroup and get ready for another round. If I didn't have any sympathy for the ordinary people of Syria and Lebanon who stand to lose the most from this, I wouldn't even mind if Hezbollah wanted to give the IDF a pretext to continue pounding them. But I do have some sympathy for these people, and I also have a lot of sympathy for ordinary Israelis who live in the northern communities and want to go back to their homes. That's not even to mention the sympathy I have for all my fellow Israelis who work in tourism and agriculture, whose livelihoods have been shredded by this war. I'll talk about that more later in the report. But first, let me tell you about some good news coming out of Lebanon this week. Hezbollah has long stood in the way of a new president being appointed by the National Assembly. But this past week, Joseph Aoun, a former commanding general of the National Army, was appointed. He wasted no time in selecting a Prime Minister, Nawaf Salam, who for the last few years has been the president of the International Court of Justice. In that role, he's been very critical of Israel, but he's also known to be no friend of Iran. Neither am I. It is likely that in this new role, pushing back against Iran's influence in Lebanon will be a higher priority for him than opposing Israel. In any event, this new governing structure in Lebanon gives that country a much better chance of finally getting out from under the thumb of Iran and Hezbollah. One other issue that's looming large in Lebanon these days is the over 1 million Syrian refugees living in the country who fled the civil war over the past decade. Many in Lebanon want those people to go back to Syria now that the Assad regime is gone. And the same goes for the Syrians living in Jordan, Turkey, and other Middle Eastern countries, including Egypt and Iraq. What about the over 1 million who are living in European countries, I wonder? Are they expected to go back to Syria? If anyone does ask them to go back, how likely is it that they will? These are some of the interesting questions in my humble opinion, but I don't expect them to be answered anytime soon. Now, one reason for that is that the situation in Syria is far from settled, and bringing large numbers of refugees back into the country would destabilize it even more. Years of rebuilding will need to be done before it's even theoretically possible to start on this project, and the process has barely even begun. The new regime in Syria has very fragile control over the rest of the country where most of the population lives. Further to the east, the Kurdish tribes dominate and Turkey is threatening them. That could very well end up being the next big story in the Middle East, and we'll keep an eye on it for you. While all this has been going on, the Iranian-backed Houthi faction, which controls most of Yemen, has not stopped firing ballistic missiles and drones at Israel. Earlier this week, 2 long-range drones were fired at Israel but intercepted before they could even get close. On Tuesday morning, another ballistic missile was fired at central Israel but shot down before it entered Israeli airspace. However, debris from that missile fell to the earth and one large segment hit a civilian house in Mevo Beitar near Jerusalem. Additional shrapnel from the missile was found in the areas of Tzur Hadassah and Beitar Illit. Thank God, no one was hurt from all this falling shrapnel and debris. I wish I could tell you that our soldiers in the field are also being spared, but the fact is that in the last week we've lost 15 IDF soldiers killed in action in the Gaza Strip, and many more have been wounded. We need to pray for those families. One soldier who was killed was from a believer family in the Galilee, and we ask you to join us in praying for them and for all the families of soldiers who have been killed in this war. A friend of mine who once played in the National Football League in the United States once told me that there are a lot of similarities between gridiron football and war, one of which is that even when you win, it hurts. I feel confident in saying that Israel will emerge victorious in this war, but it's not over yet, and even in victory, we're getting hurt. That is why at Vision for Israel, we've been supplying local communities with the tools they need to keep their people safe. This has included hundreds of bomb safety shelters, equipment and training for medical first responders, firefighters, and various other civil defense teams. The assistance that we've provided at Vision for Israel has definitely saved lives, and it's also reinforced communities and families who otherwise might have cracked under the pressure. So if you want to help out with this effort to keep Israelis safe and keep this country going, you can visit our website, visionforisrael.com, and click on the Projects tab. Thank you. For much of the past 16 months, while this war has been raging here in Israel, I've been telling you in these weekly news reports about the difficult financial situation many Israelis are facing. I got some pushback in the comments section. Some people left comments on these videos expressing doubts about it and even accusing me of exaggerating to try and con people into donating to Israel. Well, friends, I wish I had been exaggerating, but according to the data in this report, I was actually underestimating the severity of the situation. According to a recent study published by Fresh Start, a nonprofit organization here in Israel that tries to help people who are in debt and struggling to make ends meet, about 39% of Israel's adult population are spending more every month than they're earning. They're going into chronic overdraft on their bank accounts, paying interest rates close to 13%. The pattern we see over and over again is that a family in distress spends a little bit more than what they bring in the first month, and that same little bit the second month, and so on and so forth. But soon they're spending so much on interest that the hole they're in starts to get really deep. So they take out a loan to cover their overdraft, but the process continues a little at a time until another loan is necessary, and then another. Soon this family, which started out spending just a little bit more than they brought in, every month is spending a lot more than they bring in, and the problem just grows and grows and grows. As this war has dragged on and wreaked all kinds of havoc on the economy, these problems have become much worse. Now, with the new year, have come many new taxes that the government is trying to use to pay for the war. Inflation is also a big concern here. And with all this in mind, I can't find it in me to blame those who have left Israel over the past year. According to some statistics I've seen, the number is close to 130,000. A large percentage of those who left did so for financial reasons, and this is also a pattern I've seen many times in my nearly 5 decades of living in this country. Some might call me ridiculous for saying so, but I have long believed this is a strategy of the devil himself. He doesn't want the plans and purposes of God to be advanced, and he'll do anything he can to frustrate them. That includes taking all kinds of moves to increase the cost of living in Israel, which is a major problem that discourages many Jews from making Aliyah in the first place, and also drives many who are already living here to leave. So once again, please join us in praying for these issues. If you can do more than pray, please visit visionforisrael.com and click on the Projects tab, where you'll see all different ways we're seeking to bless this nation, which is a project of the kingdom of God. There's a couple more stories to touch on this week. Iran is making a big show of preparing for conflict with Israel, announcing that it has added new weapons to its military arsenal and conducting large-scale drills to show off its armed forces. Iranian officials have made their typical bellicose statements about how if Israel dares to continue with whatever it is we're doing that annoys them so much, they'll crush us like an enemy can of Coca-Cola and so on and so forth. Candidly, I find this routine very tiresome, and if reports out of Iran are true, many ordinary Iranian people do too. I wish those people all the best, and we need to pray for the good Iranians, who we try to keep in touch with. Now, another big story is the anticipated changes that the incoming administration of U.S. President-elect Donald Trump will bring. His Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, is reported to have played a decisive role in brokering this ceasefire agreement with Hamas, and many of his other nominees have made some very strong statements against Israel's enemies. Now there's lots more going on that deserves to be reported on that, but we're really out of time, and I want to continue the tradition of ending with some good news, and it goes like this. When I first came to Israel in the mid-1970s, there were only a handful of believing congregations in the whole country, most of them operating almost completely underground. But today there are an estimated 30,000 people regularly attending one of the nearly 1,000 fellowships here. Wow! Almost all of which are operating right out in the open. There are fellowships with regular meetings conducted in Hebrew, Arabic, Amharic, English, Russian, French, Spanish, and probably several other languages. Bible colleges and seminaries have been established to teach the next generation of leadership, and there are dozens of ministry organizations with a very visible public presence, most of them staffed by Israeli-believing citizens. Now, my own children and grandchildren are among the thousands born here and raised in this country who are part of the body of Messiah, serving alongside both Jews and Gentiles, one in Messiah together. Many believers have served with distinction in the IDF during this war, and some of them have established a credible voice in prominent media organizations that are also fighting the battle for public opinion. That battle will go on long after the guns fall silent in Gaza and Lebanon, even if they ever do fall completely silent. Although there are still those who oppose the gospel in Israel, the presence of believers in this country is getting widespread acceptance, along with an appreciation for the contribution our community is making to the country. That's great news, my friends, and I hope you'll join me in rejoicing in it and praising God for it. This is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it, and continue to pray for all the hostages to come home. Until next week, I'm Barry Segal, and this has been another edition, a long one, of VFI News from Israel. God bless you and shalom.